You say you want peace, yet you keep choosing chaos. You say you long for love, yet you keep pushing it away. Yet you keep hiding in silence. You say you want to be seen. Why do you keep stepping away from what your soul keeps asking for? We often blame time. We blame others. We blame the world. But if we are honest, we know that something deeper is at work. Something inside us that quietly pulls the strings. Something that does not match what our words claim to desire. Carl Jung saw this clearly. He understood that our lives are shaped not only by what we know, but by what we refuse to know. The conscious mind may dream of change, but the unconscious mind clings to what is safe, familiar, and unresolved. You sabotage yourself not because you are flawed, but because you are divided. One part of you moves forward, another part holds back. One part seeks love, another fears being hurt again. One part wants to rise, another still lives in the wound. The ego wants control, it wants clarity, it wants safety. The shadow does not obey those rules. It holds pain that was denied, it remembers every betrayal. It carries the fear, rage, longing, and shame that the ego cannot bear to face. This is the silent tension beneath your decisions. The ego says, I want to be free. The shadow says freedom is not safe. The ego says, I want connection. The shadow remembers abandonment. The ego says, I want peace. The shadow waits for the next war. Until this inner conflict is brought into awareness, it rules your life. You repeat old patterns. You chase love and then push it away. You start and then sabotage. You succeed and then feel nothing. It is not weakness. It is unintegrated pain. Jung called this the shadow, not evil, not wrong, simply forgotten. These are the parts of you you had to hide in order to survive. But what you hide does not disappear. It waits for the day you are strong enough to face it with compassion. The real blocks in your life are not outside you. They are within the war between who you became to survive and who you truly are. The question is not what do you want. The deeper question is which part of you does not want it and why. This is not a video about fixing yourself. It is a call to meet yourself fully. Not just the part that smiles, but the part that trembles. The part that sabotages. The part that waits in the dark for you to finally listen. Carl Jung did not see the human mind as a simple thing. He saw it as a living battlefield between forces that we know and forces we fear. Between the self we show the world and the self we try to bury underground. He believed the ego was necessary. It helps us function. It gives shape to experience. But he also warned that the ego is only one small island floating on a vast unconscious sea. And what lies beneath often holds more power than what floats above. The ego tells stories. It builds the idea of who you think you are. It helps you feel safe. But it cannot hold the full truth. The unconscious holds memories you forgot, emotions you repressed, dreams you abandoned, and parts of you that still live in the dark. Jung wrote that what we do not make conscious will rule our life, and we will call it fate. This is not philosophy. It is fact. What we suppress will surface. And it often does so in destructive, confusing, or deeply patterned ways we struggle to explain. The war within is not dramatic at first. It shows up in hesitation, in self-doubt, in repeated frustration. You make choices that make no sense. You avoid what you want. You chase what hurts. You smile while feeling empty. Something inside is not in agreement. Jung's work invites us to stop running from this conflict. He asks us to face it, to name it, to see that what we think of as personal failure is often psychic fragmentation. Not weakness, but disconnection from the totality of who we are. He does not offer easy answers. He offers a map. A path not toward perfection, but toward integration. A path where the ego becomes less defensive. Where the unconscious becomes more conscious. Where the self is no longer divided against itself. This is the path back to inner alignment. The place where your mind, your body, your past, and your soul begin to speak again. Not in contradiction, but in chorus. Not through suppression, but through understanding. Not with fear, but with presence. The ego is not the enemy, it is the beginning. It helps us survive. It helps us name the world. It gives structure to experience, but it is not the whole of who we are. It is only a mask. And often, we forget we are wearing it. We begin building this mask early. We learn what makes us acceptable, what wins praise, what keeps us safe. We shape ourselves to fit those expectations. Slowly, what we express becomes a version of ourselves that pleases others but hides something real. Jung described the ego as the center of consciousness, not of the whole psyche, just the part that is aware. It is necessary, but it is also limited. It sees only what it allows itself to see. It protects you by narrowing the truth. When you say I am like this, it is usually the ego speaking. But what if you are more than that? What if the parts you never show are still shaping your life? What if the very qualities you repress are waiting to be lived? The ego wants identity. It wants to be someone. It fears what is unknown, messy, or painful, so it edits. It censors. It presents. It curates. But what is left out does not disappear. It gathers weight in the shadow where it waits to be seen. You may think your choices are free, but when the ego is rigid, you are only free within the limits of what you have not yet rejected. You say yes or no based on a map drawn in childhood. You think you know yourself, but you know only what you have performed. Jung warned that the ego is fragile. It depends on external feedback. It depends on approval, on being right, on being liked. And when that is threatened, the ego defends itself with pride, denial, or anger. It does not want truth. It wants control. This is why we suffer, not because we are bad, but because we live from a narrow self and call it the whole. We mistake our mask for our identity. We call the performance our personality. But beneath it lives a deeper self still waiting to be known. The shadow is everything you have pushed away, every thought you denied, every feeling you buried, every impulse you learned to fear. It is not evil. It is not a monster. It is simply the part of you that never got permission to exist. It begins in childhood. You are born whole, open, alive. But you quickly learn what is too much, too angry, too loud, too soft, too wild. To stay loved, you disown pieces of yourself. You exile them into silence. You call them not me. Over time, these pieces gather weight. They do not disappear. They drift beneath awareness. They shape your reactions. They haunt your dreams. They leak into your relationships. And yet you do not see them, because the ego says they are not yours. But they are. The shadow is you, not the you perform. The you avoided, the you forgot. It holds your sorrow, your rage, your lust, your envy, your shame. But it also holds your creativity, your truth, your fire. What you reject holds power, not because it is dangerous, but because it is real. The parts you hide carry the energy of life. What you call ugly may be sacred. What you call wrong may be wise. What you call weakness may be your greatest strength. Jung taught that the shadow is not your enemy. It is your twin. It is your mirror. It is your missing voice. And until you face it, you will never feel whole. You will keep chasing healing while avoiding the part that most needs your love. The shadow asks to be seen, not analyzed, not judged, seen, felt, allowed. It wants presence. It wants honesty. It wants to be part of you again, not locked away, not fought against, but integrated with compassion and responsibility. Most people fear the shadow because they confuse it with darkness. But real darkness is not in feeling too much, it is in suppressing it. Numbness is not peace, it is exile, and what is exiled always returns. Often louder, often more painfully. To meet your shadow is to reclaim your soul. Not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you whole. It gives you back what the world asked you to abandon. It lets you live without pretending, without performing, without fear of your own truth. The ego wants control. It wants simplicity. It wants to feel good and look good. The shadow wants truth. It wants to be heard. It wants the whole story. These two forces live inside you. And often, they do not agree. The ego avoids discomfort. The shadow lives in it. The ego wants the light. The shadow waits in the dark. The ego wants to be accepted. The shadow remembers being rejected. The ego says move on. The shadow says not yet. This is where the tension builds. You make choices that feel out of sync. You say yes when something inside screams no. You sabotage what you love. You repeat old pain. You try to stay in control, but your emotions leak through. The ego says this is not me, but the shadow knows better. The anger that rises, the jealousy that stings, the fear that blocks. These are not strangers. They are unspoken parts of you asking to be recognized, not indulged, just named. Jung taught that what you resist persists, and what you do not integrate will find another way to express itself, sometimes in illness, sometimes in addiction, sometimes in collapse, but always with the same message. Something inside is being denied. This conflict is not a flaw, it is a threshold. It is the meeting point between who you think you are and who you truly are. It is not there to destroy you. It is there to wake you, to open what has been closed, to reconnect what has been split. Most people never name this war. They just feel tired, disconnected, anxious, or numb. They keep trying to fix the symptoms without ever meeting the cause. And the cause is this: the self is divided. The inner voice is not in harmony. Healing does not begin when the ego wins. Healing begins when the ego listens, when it stops defending, when it stops performing, when it becomes curious about what lives in the silence. This is how wholeness begins, not in perfection, in surrender. The ego fears what it cannot predict, so it creates illusions of safety. It believes if you are perfect, you will be loved. If you are in control, you will be safe. If you never show weakness, you will never be hurt again. Perfection becomes a shield. You strive to be flawless not because you enjoy the pressure, but because you are terrified of what will be seen if you fail. Beneath the need to be right is the fear of being exposed, not just to others, but to yourself. Control is not about strength. It is often a response to buried chaos. You try to organize your outer world because your inner world feels uncertain. You micromanage emotions. You avoid vulnerability. You measure worth by outcomes. But the fear never fully leaves. The ego whispers that if you just work harder, speak better, look stronger, then the shadow will finally go quiet. But it never does, because what the shadow wants is not your success. It wants your honesty. It wants your presence. It wants to be felt. You begin to live inside a performance. You become your achievements, your titles, your image. But deep down, you sense something is missing. You feel disconnected from yourself because you have traded truth for approval. And that trade always leaves a wound. You tell yourself this is who I am. But the voice that says it feels thin, it feels rehearsed. Something inside you still trembles, still waits, still wonders if there is more. The more you try to appear whole, the more your shadow cries out for wholeness. Jung understood this pattern well. He saw that many breakdowns are not signs of weakness. They are the collapse of false selves. The soul can only wear a mask for so long. Eventually, something deeper demands to be seen. Perfection and control are not sustainable. They exhaust you. They isolate you. They keep you chasing safety while hiding the part of you that needs healing most. To move beyond them, you do not need to let go of order. You need to let go of fear. Not all masks are made of pride. Some are made of light. You speak of love, presence, and peace. You learn to stay positive. You avoid judgment. You meditate. You pray. But beneath the stillness, something unresolved still stirs. This is what Jung warned us about. When spirituality becomes escape, when silence becomes suppression, when positivity becomes denial, you say you are healed, but your body holds tension. You say you forgive, but your eyes avoid your own reflection. True spirituality does not avoid the shadow, it walks toward it. It sits with discomfort. It lets the old pain surface. It listens to the rage. It welcomes the tears. It embraces the full spectrum of what it means to be human. But the ego often hijacks spiritual language. It hides behind concepts. It uses high ideals to avoid honest emotion. It replaces depth with image. It chooses light not as liberation, but as a way to hide the dark that still lives unintegrated. You say you let go, but you are still haunted. You say you feel nothing and think that is peace. But peace is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of wholeness. And wholeness cannot exist where truth is edited to look clean. The most painful wounds are not those left open. They are the ones hidden behind wisdom. You may quote truth but avoid your own. You may preach compassion but suppress your shame. You may guide others but not know where your own fear lives. Jung taught that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. One becomes enlightened by making the darkness conscious. That means naming the grief, facing the anger, letting the ache be felt fully without the need to rise above it. Spiritual bypassing is not healing, it is decoration. It makes pain look pretty, but never transforms it. It hides the wound beneath sacred words, but the soul does not want to look good. It wants to be whole, and wholeness is not always graceful. There is a moment when the mask sticks, when the defense becomes habit, when the voice that once protected you begins to sound like your own. You no longer see it as armor. You call it personality. You say this is just who I am. You say I am always calm. But maybe that calm is fear of conflict. You say I do not need help. But maybe that independence is fear of being let down. You say I move on quickly. But maybe you have just forgotten how to feel what hurts. We confuse adaptation with identity. We think the person we became to survive is the person we truly are. But survival often asks us to shrink, to freeze, to harden, to smile while aching. That is not authenticity. That is endurance. The ego defends what it believes keeps you safe. But safety is not the same as truth. You may protect the version of you that worked, but working is not the same as living. You can function and still feel numb. You can succeed and still feel lost. The shadow is not gone just because you no longer speak its name. It watches, it waits, it shows up in reactions you cannot explain. In the way you flinch when touched with love. In the way you withdraw when things begin to feel real. The moment of awakening begins when you ask, whose voice is this? Who taught me to hide? Who told me this part of me was wrong? When you stop performing who you became and begin meeting who you were before the mask was necessary. Jung believed the task of healing was not to become someone else. It was to remember the parts of you that had been lost along the way. To bring them back into the whole, not to fix you. To reunite you. You are not your defense. You are not your numbness. You are not your mask. Beneath the shield lives a self that still feels. That still remembers. That still longs. And when you stop fighting it, you do not lose yourself. You finally come home. You hold it together for years. You keep smiling. You keep producing. You keep saying you are fine. Until one day, you are not. Something snaps. Something breaks. But the breaking is not failure. It is the first crack in the illusion. The ego does not collapse all at once. It fractures slowly. You start feeling tired for no reason. You stop caring about what once mattered. You look around and nothing feels real. It is as if your life keeps moving, but your soul has gone missing. This is the moment Jung called the encounter with the self. The ego begins to lose its grip. The image you built no longer fits. You try to go back to who you were, but the mask no longer stays on your face the way it used to. You may call it burnout, depression, anxiety, panic, but under the labels is something older, something deeper. A confrontation with the parts of you you buried to belong. The pain is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something wants to be seen. Most people fear this collapse. They fight to hold the pieces together, but Jung saw this unraveling as sacred. He knew that sometimes the old self must die for the deeper self to rise. The breakdown is not the end. It is the beginning of truth. You feel lost because the map no longer applies. The rules no longer work. The goals no longer inspire. You try to explain it, but no explanation satisfies. Because what is dying is not your life. What is dying is the version of you that was never real. The moment of collapse is not weakness. It is a revolt of the soul. It is the moment your inner truth stops cooperating with the roles you were assigned. It is not a mental failure. It is a spiritual awakening in disguise. To the world, it may look like falling apart. To the ego, it feels like death. But to the soul, it is the first breath. The first real breath you have taken in years, not to impress, not to survive, but to be. When the ego cracks, something unexpected begins to stir. It is not rage, it is not shame, it is not pride. It is the soul, a voice you forgot you had, a presence that was always there, waiting beneath the noise and roles. The soul does not shout, it does not rush, it does not explain, it whispers, it moves through silence. It speaks through symbols, images, memories you thought were lost. It brings up what matters not to punish you, but to reunite you with your own truth. Jung believed the soul speaks most clearly when the ego grows quiet. Not when we feel strong, but when we finally stop pretending. The breakdown becomes a doorway. Not to collapse, but to coherence. Not to drama, but to deep realignment. You begin to sense what is real again. Not what you should want, but what you truly need. Not what others expect, but what brings you alive. Your old ambitions lose flavor. Your old stories lose power, and something raw begins to breathe. This is not a return to who you used to be. It is a remembering of who you were before you forgot. Before you silenced your own voice to be accepted. Before you abandoned yourself to survive. The soul does not ask for perfection. It asks for presence. You begin to feel more. Grief rises. Old anger moves. Forgotten longing returns, not to overwhelm you, but to reawaken you. What you thought you buried is not there to destroy you. It is there to guide you back to what is real. Jung once wrote that in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. This is the truth of awakening. You do not climb the light. You descend into honesty. You meet what was cast away. You reclaim what you once feared to feel. The soul is not separate from the shadow. It lives inside it. The very parts you rejected are the doorway to your depth. This is where real power begins, not in control, not in the mask, but in the quiet courage to sit with your own truth without running. To integrate the shadow does not mean to fix it. It means to face it, to sit with what you once avoided, to hear the voice you once silenced, to realize that healing is not the absence of darkness, but the relationship you build with it. Most people think light defeats the dark, but Jung saw something more profound. Light that ignores the dark becomes shallow. It blinds rather than illuminates. Real light makes space for what is hidden. It reveals, not erases. Integration is not perfection. It is participation. It is when you begin to notice your reactions without shame, when you pause before blaming, when you ask why before judging, when you begin to include rather than exile parts of yourself. You start to recognize your patterns. The anger that hides hurt, the withdrawal that masks fear, the pride that covers shame. These are not problems to destroy. They are messages. They are parts of you trying to speak through your defenses. To integrate the shadow is to take responsibility without punishment. It is not about blame. It is about recognition. You begin to see that what you project onto others lives first in you. And this seeing becomes the beginning of transformation. Jung taught that the shadow must be confronted, not to be eliminated, but to be integrated. It becomes a source of vitality, creativity, and authenticity. What you once rejected becomes your strength. What once hurt becomes the doorway to your humanity. This work is not done all at once. It is a slow unfolding. A daily choice to stay present, to remain honest, to stop performing, to meet life without the old mask. The more you practice, the more your inner world begins to feel whole again. Integration does not mean your pain disappears. It means you no longer fear it. You no longer run, you listen. You welcome the part of you that was once unloved. And in doing so, you return to yourself with new depth, new grace, and real presence. Integration is not an idea, it is a daily practice. A way of relating to yourself with honesty. It begins with awareness. The willingness to witness your emotional reactions without rushing to justify or suppress them. Every strong emotion is a doorway. Anger, shame, jealousy, fear. These are not flaws. They are signals. When you pause and ask, why is this so strong, you begin to uncover the layer beneath. The shadow does not scream. It stirs gently beneath your reactions. Journaling becomes a mirror. You write not to impress, but to uncover. Not to solve, but to see. The moment you put words to the storm inside, it begins to shift. What was vague becomes visible. What was hidden begins to speak. Dreams are another language of the shadow. Jung believed that dreams are the voice of the unconscious. Pay attention to the symbols, the figures, the emotions. What frightens you in dreams often represents a part of you that is ready to return. Active imagination is a sacred dialogue. You let the unconscious speak through images or writing. You imagine sitting across from your fear, your guilt, your lost self. You let them speak. You ask what they want. You listen with presence, not judgment. Shadow work is not a technique. It is a relationship. You are learning to become an ally to your own depth. You stop trying to escape your past. You stop trying to fix your feelings. You start showing up for yourself the way no one ever did. Compassion is the ground. Without it, shadow work becomes punishment. This is not about exposing yourself to feel ashamed. It is about meeting what once scared you with gentleness. The same way you would comfort a wounded child who was never held. This practice is not always graceful. Some days it feels like progress. Some days it feels like chaos. But even in the mess, you are closer to yourself than ever before. Because now, at least you are not pretending. You are finally present. The shadow does not only hold pain, it also holds power. Within what you rejected lives the fire you once silenced, the courage you buried, the creativity you exiled, the passion you denied. Your fullness was never gone, only forgotten. Jung believed the shadow is not just the dark of the unconscious, it is also the root of renewal. The very place we fear is often the place that holds our life force. The energy we need does not come from light alone, it comes from integration. When you reclaim your shadow, you reclaim your voice. You speak not only to be heard, but to reveal something real. Your words begin to carry depth. Your actions hold weight. You are no longer just performing. You are showing up with soul. Creativity flows more freely. Not because you are forcing it, but because you are no longer censoring yourself. The part of you that once whispered this is too much now becomes the part that dares to say this is me. All of me. What once made you afraid now makes you real. The grief that cracked you open becomes your softness. The rage you feared becomes your clarity. The shame you carried becomes your wisdom. The shadow becomes your strength. This is what Jung meant by wholeness. Not light without darkness, but light that has faced darkness. A self that includes all of itself, not to become perfect, but to become real. To live with nothing hidden, to speak without disguise, to love without defense. Vitality returns. Not in the form of endless happiness, but in the form of honest aliveness. You are no longer living someone else's story. You are no longer avoiding yourself. You are home again, and everything you touch feels more awake. The shadow was never your enemy. It was your invitation. To become conscious, to become whole, to become fully alive. And now that you have met it, you begin to sense the real treasure it held all along was never destruction, it was depth. Jung did not seek perfection. He saw it as a fantasy of the ego. A trap that keeps us performing instead of transforming. What he offered instead was something far more radical. Wholeness. A state where nothing within us is denied or left behind. Wholeness means you no longer divide yourself into good and bad. You stop pretending that light is all you are. You stop hiding from what hurts. You begin to see that every wound, every fear, every failure belongs to the story of becoming. It is not about eliminating the dark. It is about including it. Not surrendering to it, but hearing it. Not feeding it, but learning from it. What you integrate becomes part of your strength. What you reject becomes your fate. Jung saw the soul as a totality. It contains opposites. Masculine and feminine, order and chaos, conscious and unconscious, reason and feeling. Healing happens when these polarities meet. Not in battle, but in dialogue, in balance, in relationship. You stop trying to be one thing. You allow yourself to be many. You stop needing approval to exist. You begin to embody your own truth. Wholeness is not about image. It is about integration. About no longer needing to cut parts of yourself to fit a role. The wholeness Jung spoke of is not an endpoint. It is a process, a practice, a lifelong conversation between your surface and your depths. Between what you know and what you are still discovering. Between the part that speaks and the part that still waits. In wholeness, you are not perfect. You are present. You are not always confident. But you are real. You still fall, but you fall with awareness. You still hurt, but you hurt without abandoning yourself. And this changes everything. To live in wholeness is to finally feel at home in your own skin. Not because everything is easy, but because nothing is exiled. You are no longer chasing peace. You are embodying it. By facing what is hard, by holding what is soft, by being all of you. The real you is not only your light. It is also your doubt, your grief, your hunger to be seen. You are not meant to be pure. You are meant to be whole. You are made of contradictions. And this is not a flaw. It is a doorway. You feel love and fear at once. You long to be close and pull away. You want to grow and still carry resistance. This complexity is not weakness. It is your humanity. It is the texture of a soul that has lived broken and still longs to open. Jung warned that when we identify only with the bright side of the self, we become blind. Not because the dark is gone, but because we refuse to look. And in that blindness, we repeat what we do not understand. We suffer without clarity. To embrace your full self is to stop choosing sides. To say yes to the fierce and the tender. To hold space for your ambition and your fear, your logic and your intuition, your doubt and your trust. These do not cancel each other. They complete each other. You are not here to be simple. You are here to be real. To live a life that reflects your totality. To bring your shadow into the conversation. To bring your heart into your decisions. To live with depth, not decoration. Wholeness is not a brand. It is a risk. A quiet revolt against the culture of image. A return to something ancient inside you. Something that remembers when you were not afraid to feel, to break, to be held, to become. When you stop editing yourself to be liked, You begin to love yourself as you are. Not because you are finished, but because you are finally honest. This honesty makes you luminous, not with perfection, but with presence. You become someone who is not afraid to feel deeply, to fall and rise, to be seen in your mess and still speak with grace. This is what Jung pointed us toward, not a perfect self, but a self fully alive, fully seen, fully human. There's a quiet revolution that begins when you stop running from your own reflection. You are no longer trying to escape the parts of you that ache. You stop performing strength and begin practicing presence. You stop editing truth and begin embodying it. You begin to feel more grounded. Not because life is easier, but because you are no longer split. You stand where you once collapsed. You speak where you once silenced. You bring your full self to each moment, and something inside starts to feel honest again. The fear of being found out fades. Because now you are no longer hiding. The shame of not being enough softens. Because now you are no longer pretending to be more than you are. You are simply being. And that becomes enough. Your relationships shift. You no longer attract people to complete you. You meet others as equals. You stop blaming and start listening. You stop clinging and start respecting. You are no longer afraid to be alone, and so you begin to truly connect. Work becomes less about proving yourself and more about expressing what matters. Success is no longer a mask. It becomes a mirror of your inner state. You stop chasing outcomes and start building meaning. You are no longer working to be someone. You already are. Even your pain becomes sacred. Not because you enjoy it, but because it reveals your depth. You no longer see sadness as a failure. You see it as a signal. You hold space for it the way you would for a friend. You are no longer your own enemy. When you stop running from yourself, you stop needing the world to validate you. You stop needing others to save you. You stop begging for peace and begin living from it. You are no longer at war within, and that changes everything without. This is the return Jung spoke of. Not a return to what you were, but to what you had forgotten. A return to the self that was never gone, only buried. The one who can hold both joy and sorrow, strength and tenderness, fire and stillness, at once. When you live from wholeness, you stop trying to be powerful. You begin to realize you already are. But it is not the kind of power that controls. It is the kind that listens. The kind that breathes. The kind that does not need to prove anything. True power emerges from self-acceptance. You are no longer driven by insecurity. You are no longer afraid of being seen. Your words carry weight, not because they shout, but because they come from stillness. They come from a self that is no longer at war. Humility naturally rises. Not the kind that shrinks, but the kind that bows to truth. You are not above your shadow, nor beneath it. You walk beside it. You carry your humanity with grace. You own your flaws, not as failures, but as reminders of your depth. You no longer need to dominate or hide. You begin to collaborate with life, not compete against it. You start to feel the intelligence of your own emotions, the wisdom in your old pain, the creativity in your once rejected impulses. You become more honest in your love. You are no longer loving to get something. You are loving because love is what flows when fear no longer blocks the heart. You do not seek to fix others. You hold space for them, the same way you learn to hold space for yourself. Jung believed that wholeness makes love possible. Because real love does not come from the ego. It comes from the soul. And the soul does not ask that you be perfect. It only asks that you be present, fully, truthfully, tenderly. Living from wholeness makes you more human, not less. You cry without apology. You laugh without control. You stand your ground without aggression. You forgive without forgetting. You become less reactive and more responsive. Less guarded and more awake. And in that space, life begins to feel sacred again. Not because it is always beautiful, but because it is always real. And when you live as a whole human, you become the kind of person who can hold both beauty and darkness without breaking. That is power. In the end, this journey is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before the world taught you to hide. It is about returning to yourself, not the mask, not the role, but the living soul beneath it all. You do not need to be perfect to be whole. You need to be honest. You need to be present. You need to be brave enough to turn inward when everything outside tries to pull you away. That turning is the first act of real freedom. The shadow was never your enemy. It was your teacher. It showed you where you split, where you hurt, where you lied to yourself to survive. It held your truth in exile, waiting for the moment you were ready to come home. Carl Jung never promised that inner work would be easy. He promised it would be worth it. Because the cost of avoiding yourself is a life lived in fragments. A life where success feels empty, where love feels distant, where you never truly arrive. But when you do the work, you begin to feel different, not better. More real. You begin to walk slower, listen deeper, speak with intention. You stop rushing to be somewhere else. Because you finally realize everything you were looking for was always within. This is not the end. It is the beginning of a new relationship with yourself, one marked by clarity instead of confusion, compassion instead of self-rejection, curiosity instead of judgment. This is where wholeness begins, and where the real journey continues. So if you feel lost, maybe it is not light you need. Maybe it is the courage to face the dark, to listen to what hurts, to reclaim what you forgot, and in doing so, to become fully alive, not in spite of your shadow, but because of it. Wholeness is not a destination. It is a daily returning, a daily remembering, a daily choice to meet yourself fully, in the dark, in the light, in every place in between. And to know, finally, you are enough. Because now you are all here,